When a piece of media is being created, whether it be a movie, book, show, or in this case a video game, not all the content that's planned for it or even gets implemented into it will end up in the final product. The Left 4 Dead series is no exception. There's been tons of content that's either been scrapped, removed, or even changed during the development of both games. This could be for a multitude of reasons, ranging from they couldn't get it to work properly, to hardware limitations, to it just straight up being a bad idea. And that kind of content is exactly what I want to talk about for today's video, so I hope you enjoy. The first time we ever got to see Left 4 Dead was in the form of a secret video hidden in the Orange Box, which is a game compilation comprising of Half-Life 2 and its episodes, as well as Team Fortress 2 and Portal. Although this video doesn't show us any actual gameplay, it does show us one of the biggest differences between this version of the game and the final one, and that is in the character designs themselves. It's very obvious that these designs are far different compared to what's actually used in the final game. Honestly, I think the final game's designs actually look way better. They just look more unique and do a better job at reflecting the characters' personalities, whereas the old ones just kind of look a bit generic and almost like they just came out of like Call of Duty or something. Although you may be disappointed in the change in character designs, I bet you're not disappointed that this guy was removed. This special infected, appropriately named the Screamer, would wander around the maps of the game, and once agitated, he would run away from survivors to get to a safe space, only to then scream and then summon a horde. They would have worked kind of similar to the Screamers in World War Z, the only difference being the ones in World War Z actually stay in place, whereas the ones in the beta Left 4 Dead would have ran away from the players, which would have been very annoying to deal with. Speaking of special infected, some of the ones that actually did make it into the final game had slightly different behaviours, like the Witch for example, who would have attacked everyone on the team instead of just the person that agitated them. Or how about the Hunter, who was supposedly originally able to hang on ceilings. One last thing I want to mention before we move on to Left 4 Dead 2 is the cut campaign known as Dammit. This campaign was originally meant to bridge the gap between Dead Air and Blood Harvest, and it would have consisted of 3 chapters: the Orchard, the Campground, and finally, the Dam. This campaign was actually released by Turtle Rock sometime in late 2016, but every download link just takes me to like this car parts website, which is kind of weird. This campaign also ended in a unique way. Instead of getting into like a car or a helicopter or something like that, instead you would have to open a series of gates which would have gotten you to the other side of the dam and ended the campaign. Although the original map was never finished, there is actually a recreation on the Steam Workshop for Left 4 Dead 2. Anyway, that's kind of all I wanted to talk about for the original Left 4 Dead. Now I think it's time we move on to Left 4 Dead 2 and see what kinds of content we can find there. Left 4 Dead 2 was first shown off at E3 of 2009, and much like the Left 4 Dead 1 teaser, it doesn't really show us any actual gameplay. This trailer, however, does show off some important aspects of the game, like the difference in setting and, more importantly, the new cast of survivors. These characters also went through design changes between the release of this trailer and the release of the final game, however they aren't quite as drastic since the teaser was released only 6 months before the game's initial release. First off, in this trailer, Coach has a bright blue and bright yellow shirt. Then there's Rochelle, who wears a yellow shirt and has a slightly different hairstyle. Then there's Ellis, who's wearing a white and blue shirt and hat. Then finally, there's Nick, who looks pretty much the same here as he does in the final game. Although Nick's design pretty much stayed the same, his story was originally entirely different. He was meant to be a prisoner who escaped from prison during the outbreak and would have found a fancy suit inside an abandoned store.
The writers originally devised a biography for a convict character. There was an idea that here in the lawless world of the infected, this escaped convict, sick of wearing prison clothes, had taken the effort to loot a very expensive white suit from an abandoned clothing store. He might as well survive the apocalypse in style. This concept gradually evolved into the Riverboat Gambler.
Left 4 Dead 2 also introduced 3 new special infected, those being the Spitter, the Jockey, and the Charger, and of course those also went through several design changes during the development of the game. In my opinion, the Spitter and the Jockey's designs aren't too interesting, since they pretty much look almost exactly the same as they do in the final game. The Charger, however, is an entirely different story. They started out looking nothing like what they do in the final game, only to then sort of slowly evolve over the course of development into what they are now. There were also quite a few special infected that were cut from the game during the development, one of those being the Leaker. Although we don't know what the Leaker was supposed to look like, what we do know is that it was supposed to run around the map and find a spot to sort of plant itself into the ground and act as a landmine which would explode when the survivors got close. The Leaker was cut because it effectively alerted the survivors to when and where they were being planted with some very obvious cues. Although it was cut early on in the game's development, there is still code for it in the final game, and it can actually be spawned using console commands, although they use the model and animations of the Boomer. The Leaker wasn't the only special infected cut from the game. There's concept art for 4 new special infected, those being named the Meat Wall, Claws, the Hal Hog, and this guy. Staying on the topic of infected, the Fallen Survivor, one of the uncommon infected in the game, was originally meant to be in the game at launch. However, playtesters of the beta version were having trouble with him. He was, however, reintroduced in the Passing Campaign DLC, which came out 5 months after the game's initial release. There was also evidence of weapons that were cut from the final game in the files of it. These include a flare gun, an LAW rocket launcher, a riot shield, and a didgeridoo. Anyway, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.